Welcome to the Leaders of B2B podcast, a weekly show where we bring you interviews and in the weeds expertise with today's B2B experts and thought leaders. You can see more about today's episode and guest by visiting our website at leadersofb2b.com. This episode is brought to you by Content Allies. We help B2B companies launch revenue-generating podcasts. We schedule interviews between you and your ideal prospects and strategic partners. You show up for engaging conversations, we handle everything else. Ready to build a podcast that grows your business in just 1 hour per week? Reach out to us at contentallies.com. Well, thank you for coming on the show, Jasmeet. Looking forward to talking today, learning more about Axtria and what you guys are doing with the Life Sciences Leadership podcast. Thank you for coming on here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jake. Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. So let's do just a little bit of background here, just for context for everyone on the show. Can you first give us just a brief overview? What is your position at Axtria? What does Axtria do? Can you just give us that kind of high-level overview to context set for everyone?
Absolutely. So I am the global head of marketing at Axtria. Axtria is actually one of the top global providers of cloud software and data analytics solutions to the life sciences industry. And we serve across the value chain. We have heavy business, heavy focus in the commercial area, but we are also in clinical and medical affairs. So we go across the life sciences value chain.
Okay. That's awesome. And I'm curious also just kind of context set a little bit. I mean, I'm curious, what was your journey to become the global head of marketing here? Because I see you were founded and you were a part of a lot of startups that you built and exited, and you're often CEO. And so I'm curious, what was that path looking like for you to go from kind of founder into like a global head of marketing role? Like what was
Right.
kind of, what did that look like? Yeah.
So I would say, Jake, I was lucky to be in an environment that allowed me to do that. So I started my journey. I have a computer science degree, which is more of a technical and science degree, right? So I started as product. In the product team, I was doing product development and product management. Then I got the opportunity to do business development, right? So it did not start with marketing. That's what I'm trying to say. But I think the good thing about startup, because I've always been in startup world, I was part of a startup which was very small, like one of the first 5 people in the room, and got the flexibility to move around as the startup grew. And one of the things I think what a lot of people don't realize the value is if you're part of a growing company, you get a lot more opportunities and headroom to grow. And that gave me the potential to actually look into different areas. And finally, when it was time to actually start the marketing function, I was involved in setting up the marketing function. From there, I moved along. As you said, I founded my own startups. Some went south, some did well. So, that's always the part of the startup journey. But I did pretty well as CEO of Yep Lab, which was in the marketing automation space, and we provided both services. But more importantly, we had a proprietary software that collected all the data from the web and enriched the customer targets that you have in your CRM. So that software also did well. So from here on, I moved to Axtria and built the Axtria marketing function. So that's been
Nice.
my summary of my job.
Nice. That's awesome. That's quite a journey there. And so I'm curious, when we look at a company like Axtria, one of the things is I think also always helpful to understand as we go toward podcasting, like what does customers look like in, like a large company like this that's like servicing pharmaceutical space? Like, is this something where every deal that's signing is like a multi-million-dollar deal? And like, I guess what I'm trying to understand is like, what does that look like? And then like, what is marketing's function in an organization like this?
Right. So it's actually from deal size perspective. It's all types of deals come through, and
Mhm,
there's the primary reason for that is the customers that we serve. We work with pretty much all the top 20 pharma companies. Pretty much all the large companies out there. Uh, the one, it's basically the large company have typically larger projects, right? And the smaller would have, relatively smaller. But I think the major difference is, the the function or the offering that you have. What business model do you have for that, right? So a lot of our work uh, is also kind of project based. So depending on how big that project is, the size can vary, right? So that's on the size of the deals, which is multi-million and smaller as well. Then the function of marketing is, you know the way to look at it is, how do you actually make sure that you have mind share of your customers, and hopefully more mind share than you deserve, because that's the job of marketing, right? To get to the customers. So there's a lot of aspect of brand building, which in a when you are starting up and when you're growing. Now, actually, has gone through that journey. You go through all different phases to actually build that brand,
mhm.
and you always have like the what is the next level brand that you want to build for your company. Uh, from day one, you cannot be a Microsoft or
Mhm.
right. So you have to go step by step. But hopefully, you do it in a way that you're making, uh, we say that, punching above your weight, right? So that's basically what we're trying to do. And then there's a lot of importance in a, in a company like ours, where we really need to make sure that the interactions with the customer, the engagement that we are having, and the exposure we are creating, you know, converts into business and dollars, right? So there is a lot of attention that we give to making sure that every dollar that's spent on marketing actually has a return on investment, which is favorable, and we're bringing in good business, and that's basically where we focus on. I would also say, one of the things that you have to focus on, which is kind of missed in a lot of marketing functions. You have to actually go direct to the customers all the time. You have to really figure out uh, how to engage with the customers directly and not be dependent on the sales or the business teams. That's kind of the other area that we really need to focus on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think that ties in. I'm curious, so when we talk about one of the things we want to talk about today is the Life Sciences Leadership Podcast. And so I'm curious, what was that motivation for you? Was this to have conversations with the customers, or yeah, what did that look like, or what drove that for you to create the podcast?
Actually, it was multiple things. So one, of course, it was my own personal experience as podcasting was picking up. I realized I was spending a lot more time on podcast during my commute. So
Hmm.
I realized, if I'm doing this, there are customers that we have who also have this channel, and we are missing on this channel. So we must actually bring this on, right? So
Hmm.
audio content was kind of one of the drivers that we needed to have. Then, the second thing was, how would we fuel the content creation in the marketing engine, right?
Hmm.
Uh, because there is a lot of content that gets created, which is written content.
Hmm.
But as anyone who has worked in marketing, or, who has written something, knows that sometimes, and for some people, it's harder to actually write. I mean, they are the most, uh, you know, geniuses, and, they are like experts in their area. but when it comes to writing, I mean, they're not very comfortable, right?
Mhm.
So we wanted to actually find another way where we make it easier for them to actually come to marketing and create content. So that was kind of the other driver, which actually helped us create a lot of the content, which was, kind of perfect because in a conversation, you're able to extract way more than, someone who has to sit down and write something.
Mhm.
Uh, then there was, also this aspect of how do we engage with our customers more or the industry experts, right?
Mhm.
So we wanted a channel that would spotlight our customers or any of these experts, which will help us, of course, create content with customers, which always carries more weight and gets better engagement. Uh, and also, we are able to actually build relationships over time, right, with these customers because now you've given them a reason to engage with you and improve or build the relationship. Uh, and then, of course, there's the benefits that you get when we when we started doing this. We realized that one of the things that we were missing was the audio content was getting a lot more coverage from the SEO standpoint, from search standpoint.
Mhm.
So on our own channel, we wanted to actually drive that value. And of course, on social media, you get a lot more engagement when you have these, bite-sized content, audio content go out instead of just a written post. So those are kind of, some areas that are kind of the drivers for our podcast.
So I'm curious from a format perspective of that. Are you featuring customers and external guests or thought leaders? Are you featuring internal experts or how have you kind of gone with like the structure of who you're actually featuring on the podcast?
Actually, it's both. We are doing both. And I talked about, right? I mean, it's much easier to create content with most people in an audio
Mhm.
format in a conversation versus having someone sit down and write, right?
Mhm.
So it's both ways. Now we actually have two different podcasts. One is the Life Sciences Leadership podcast,
Mhm.
which focuses on very critical, functional, and technical topics that are kind of driving the transformation in our industry, right?
Mhm.
Focus of the Life Sciences Leadership podcast. And then we have the Leading Minds podcast, which is focused on more leadership and their journey, and what advice they have for aspiring leaders. Um, and this was like a learning because when we were doing the Life Sciences Leadership podcast, uh, realized that CXOs or executives, they are not really in a functional area, right? So the format of the podcast for the audience was not really the right one for the CXOs. So
Mhm.
then that got me thinking, what should we do to actually get the best engagement for CXOs because they are not really into anything specific or technical or functional. So you have to talk about like broader industry trends, right? How do they see the healthcare changing and pharma world evolving and so on. So we then launched the Leading Minds, and we actually did it in collaboration with a publication
Mhm.
because we also realized that's a better fit for CXOs to have to work with like independent publication instead of working directly with us.
Interesting. So I'm looking at this, and so you it looks like you partnered with Lifesci Voice, which appears to be like a trade publication in the
Yes.
space.
Hmm.
And so you launched the Leading Mind podcast in partnership with them. Is
Yes.
that correct?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, that's all. I love that. That is a strategy I love to see. And so I'm curious, like what are, as much as you're willing to share, like what did that partnership look like? Was this a promotional thing? Was it like a paid type of thing? As much as you're willing to share, this is something I love seeing people do in B2B, but it's something not a lot of people do, and so that's awesome
Yeah.
to see you pull this off.
No, I think, see, at the end of the day, you have to figure out how do you deliver value to your customers and
Mhm.
your audience, right? And a Life Sciences Voice in their journey was we again, it's all about coming together at the right time and the right place, right?
Mhm,
So they were actually looking to launch a podcast, and we were in conversations because we had done some work with them
mhm,
in terms of the publication. So when we were doing back and forth, we realized, if they are doing it, and they were looking for actually a host to do this, right? So it came about, and we thought, this is a perfect opportunity, because at that time we were thinking about how do we kind of elevate uh, our kind of podcast
mhm.
and come out with a new one. So it kind of, just fell into place, I would say.
Nice. That's awesome. That's great. And I'm curious, from what was the, maybe even like the performance, like I guess how much did that partnership help you in terms of getting audience, getting that out there? Was like, even just like a metrics number, was that like, from promoting like life science leadership just from, Axtria, then having a partner on the other podcast? Did you guys see a notable performance improvement by having that partner to promote with?
So I think what I see is, when you engage with a senior leader, right? Uh, that engagement itself brings so much value.
Hmm.
Everything else becomes secondary. Like, let me give you an example. If I am talking to a CXO, a CEO, or a president of a company uh, who's running the pharma company, right? I mean, how can I put a dollar value to that,
Hmm.
right? Or any number of downloads, or engagement that we get on the web or social would be secondary. Having said that, what we have done at Axtria is that we have built a amazing following, and on the social channels, actually, for pretty much everything that we do, and when we work with any kind of publication analysts and all that, our work always gets more engagement on social media than any of the publications or any of the analysts, because that's the kind of community we have built. So I think it's kudos to our team, for building that kind of community, so that we don't have to even rely on, these secondary publications to help us with that.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's a great spot to be in.
Yes.
Um, and so one of the other things you kind of mentioned, just like again, the relationships and the conversations you're having with these senior leaders. I'm curious, like with like the objective of this podcast, how much of this would you say is like the relationship building, the starting conversations with these large executives, almost like account based marketing, podcasting, I guess is like the term. And how much of it is really about like the content, the perception there, or like, does this connect to your guys kind of like deal pipeline, deal flow at all? What does that look like for you?
It's actually a mix of the two things that you said. You
Mhm,
basically have to look at it from what's the value for the executive that we are engaging with,
mhm,
and then what's the value for us to do it, right?
mhm,
It has to, of course, be a combination. But largely you also have to think about, if you're creating any kind of content for our audience, is it valuable for them?
mhm,
Right? I mean, two people can talk and have a point of view, but it's not delivering value to the audience, then it's not going to be worthwhile. So I think we kind of have to, put some checks and balances to make sure it's valuable to our audience
mhm,
as well. But I think in terms of getting the content and building the relationships, it's a two-way street, right?
yeah,
So I always try to make sure that the executive who's getting on board feels like this is their platform, and we are giving them the stage to actually share their story, right? If we fail to do that, it's not going to serve well for us or our audience. So that's kind of paramount to what we do. And then from the audience perspective, there are specific guardrails that I try to implement, so that we make sure that the conversation stays focused on
mhm.
certain areas, so that we can get the best value out of it. So we try to kind of balance it out.
Okay, awesome. Makes sense. And then Yeah, just creating the quality content is key at the end of the day. Like
Yes.
that's ultimately what's going to matter. So, uh, which kind of leads to another question I have is like, you guys are in this pharma niche, which I've done some work in pharma, and I will say that there's a lot of bad marketing in the industry. And so I'm curious, like, is your competition even doing this? Is anyone else in the pharma space doing this, or are you guys really like ahead of your industry by utilizing this tactic and really standing out as a result of this?
No, there are competitors who are doing it. I think now all of our competitors, not all, but a lot of them have some format of podcast. I think what I've seen is starts and stops,
Mm,
and that's where I think the companies fail or their programs fail. So someone would get excited that they would do a podcast and they would do for maybe they'll record like half a dozen or maybe 8 or 10 episodes and launch that, and then basically they're done with that.
mhm.
So I think that's where most of the companies fail, is that they're not able to actually consistently build upon what they have created. That's one thing that I've seen where I think where we have been very careful about. We actually accelerate and grow what we have really built, so we can leverage it fully.
I love that. That is such a big lesson. We see this a ton with companies. I think a lot of it's caused by like corporate buying cycles and budgets, and
Yeah,
like we've had shows that just got paused for 6 months while they waited for the next budget cycle, and it just kills all the momentum, all the steam out
right.
of that.
Well, the other thing happens is the person who is, or couple of people who are driving it, they get busy with something else, and
Hmm.
then just gets dropped, right?
Yeah,
But I think what we all know in marketing is, content. There's the shelf life, which is when it's new, but then there's the leftover half life, right, which has the compounding effect over time. And that is important, because as you keep on adding, you keep on growing your listener base, you keep on growing the traffic, you keep on growing the engagement, and people get to know you. You're building the brand around the company on the podcast, and then more people want to come on to that podcast because now you have not more content, right?
yeah, I love that. The next question I have would be then on that is like, how do you measure success of this? What KPIs, what metrics do you look at? Like, how are you measuring if your podcasts are successful?
So of course, everyone wants to talk about, what number, this is the question that we get, right? Who's your audience and how many listeners do you have, right? So that's the one question I always get when there's a new person trying to sign on. And that actually comes mostly from the comms teams and not the leader who's going to be on the podcast. But, that's, of course, one thing that we have to deal with. But personally, I do not sweat too much about it. And I think I mentioned that before as well, that I truly believe that if you are able to produce relevant content, the audience will come.
Hmm.
And the the compounding effect of content is that over time, there's gonna be more downloads, there's gonna be more views, there's gonna be more engagement. So I think that growth happens on its own. So that's an important thing to track that we do. But there's always positive growth as long as you're producing good content. Um, in terms of guests and speakers, I think that's the other area that we want to make sure that there is growth. I talked about, right? I mean, we moved from one podcast to the other for a reason that we wanted to elevate, right? So you always have to keep on expanding your speaker base.
Hmm.
So you look at, the first podcast we started, we're focusing on certain areas and certain topics, and then we expanded to other areas. I think the other thing is, of course, the topic itself. When you have uh, most people start with like a very specific target in mind, right? They have like a theme, and then who's the audience for that? and they'll create a podcast. And it's typically aligned with the what is top of mind of customers at this point, right? If there is a trend like AI, everyone wants to launch an AI related podcast, right?
Hmm.
Slowly, then has dies down over time as the hype decreases.
Hmm.
I think increasing that topic spectrum over time is important, and that's what we have done. Over time, we expanded from like one small niche to the second capability area to the third capability area, and so on. So now we are kind of going across the life sciences space.
Nice.
Those are kind of some of the things. Of course, then there's traffic and the engagement numbers that we track. So that's important.
Yeah. So it's a bit of that quantitative, the numbers and everything, but also like qualitative, reaching the right
Yes.
people, getting the right guests on there.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Um, awesome. And last area I want to hit on this is just like promotion. What's working for you in terms of getting the show out there, getting it in front of the right people? What are you finding that's working on promotion? Is it organic? Are you guys doing any paid? What does that look like?
We rarely do paid
Hmm.
uh, because we believe in our community that I said, right. I mean,
Hmm.
we invest a lot of effort to actually building that community.
Hmm.
So we shy away from paid for most part, but of course there could be instances where we have used paid. And then in terms of promotion, I think what works the most is actually what people you bring on. So finding the right guests and speakers is actually very, very important, because if you have someone who already has a follower base,
Hmm.
then of course your podcast is gonna do the episode is gonna do much better, right? So I think that's very important to actually make sure when you're signing up speakers, they have good following.
Yeah, I love it. That makes a lot of sense. And just, yeah, focusing on that organic growth and everything there. Um, awesome. Any other things you want to add about the podcast? Or I've got one other final fun question before we wrap up here.
No, I think I would say anyone who is basically trying to launch a podcast, just start with the audience that the knowledge and expertise that you have, and go for it. You will get to add more areas. You'll get to engage with a lot more people. It's a great way to be out there and engaging with your internal experts as well as industry experts and customers.
Yes, love it. Awesome. So, final fun question I have to wrap this up. I saw in a previous interview for you online that if you didn't have a day job, you would spend your time writing a fiction novel. So, my question is, what would your fiction novel be about?
So it will be a mix of my personal experiences put out in a fictional way.
Okay.
So, and I really uh, think a lot about the journey of life and what all we experience at a macro level. They are very similar,
Hmm.
but I think the when you tell a story, it's about bringing those experiences to life is what makes that story interesting, right? So I would really my first focus is always going to be on my own experiences and whatever I learned from those, right? And then, add on what I gather from a lot of the reading that I do, a lot of things I watch, a lot of experiences of, the people that I know. So that's kind of the construct that I'll go with.
Nice. Nice. I love it. That sounds awesome. Well, if it ever happens, let me know and I'll be a reader. So
Absolutely, Nick.
awesome. Well, just meet, if anyone wants to learn more about you and Axtria and your podcast online, what's the best place to go and find you?
Oh, well, Axtria.com. I would just say Axtria.com. They can search me up on Google. It should come up. My LinkedIn, my website. So it's all there.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you for taking the time to come on the show. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, Jake. This was really my pleasure.